Hello, today we are reading Digression, which takes the place of Journal 4 or Chapter 4, and this is Crabbe by William Bell. One thing I learned pretty quickly at high school was that it doesn't pay to be honest, to be yourself. I'd already learned to play the game at public school, but at high school, they stuck it to me really good. The thing was, they'd ask you questions, but they didn't listen to you. They weren't interested in what you said. Why ask a question if you don't care what the answer is? What the teacher really wanted you to do was guess what they wanted you to answer. And if you guessed correctly, not that it was hard, you were right. But it took me a little while to learn that. For instance, our grade 9 history teacher, Miss Wace, once said to us, "Now, class, I want you people to use your brains today to solve a big problem. Imagine you were all shipwrecked on an island with no adults around. It is a tropical island outside the shipping lane, so it doesn't look like you'll be rescued for a long time, if at all. You must organize yourselves in some way. How would you begin?" We all sat around for a minute looking mystified. Nobody put up their hand, but I remember this interesting book that I'd read a year or so before called The Lord of the Flies, and I thought I had a pretty good idea. I put up my hand. "Yes, Franklin." Stupid me, thinking she was really interested in my opinion, I started telling her about the novel and said that since there were no adults around, the kiddies would have to form a government and democracy wouldn't work because we were immature and uneducated and blah, blah, blah. And I ended up suggesting a dictatorship that would be temporary, and then she interrupted. "Thank you, Franklin. That will do for a start. Now, class, let's go back for a moment." Surprised that she interrupted me, I sat down, beaming and smiling, hoping that my answer was really good and thinking this was one teacher who might like me. Then I looked at her face. It was clouded with anger, although she tried to hide it. My smile disappeared and a fast, hot wave rolled over me, through me. I felt wounded and embarrassed. I'd ruined her lesson by jumping ahead and running through the ideas she had wanted us to struggle with all period as she led us from point to point. We were supposed to end up where she wanted us to, ready to begin a study of government in ancient Greece. I realized all this in a split second of agonizing humiliation. Then, when I was leaving at the end of the period, she said, "You know, Franklin, it isn't necessary to try to impress me by telling me everything you know." The same kind of thing happened in French a couple days later. Our teacher would ask for volunteers to go up to the board, and I'd stick up my bid every time. After a couple of times, he didn't ask me anymore because he was doing was he'd get kids to put up answers he hoped would be incorrect so he could use them to teach us really earth-shaking stuff like not getting le and la mixed up, all the while making sarcastic remarks. So it didn't pay to be right there either. After that, I started to check out all my teachers, and I realized they all wanted the class to go along with their plan for the lesson. That is, those who had a plan. Some of them, like Beaker Baker, the chem guy, just hemmed and hawed and rambled all period. They all asked a lot of questions, but like I said, none of them were really interested in what you said. The last thing they wanted was for you to think. But if you do think about it, school is stupid and ass backward anyways. The people who know the answers ask the questions, and the people who don't know the answers answer the questions. So, anyways, we all made an unspoken truce. I minded my business and wrote their stupid tests and did their equally stupid assignments, most of them, and I got by with dandy marks. During class, I'd watch a movie behind my eyes or read using the old book inside the textbook trick. I played their game and won all kinds of points and prizes and crap that I secretly hated, and nobody asked me what I thought of them. That went on for a few years until I got Peters for grade 12 English. He woke me up again. He walked into class the first day, all packed full of importance and plans, obviously a new teacher, and said, "Now let's get something straight, class. You are here to learn to think, not to memorize Shakespeare or draw graphs or expect me to give you all the answers. If you are an intellectual slob or mentally sloppy, I'll come down on you like a big truck. But if you try to think your way along and make an active part in class discussion, I'll see that you get an English credit. Now, let's get started." Of course, everybody figured this was baloney, and a few of the guys tried to make it hard for the new teacher, but Peters ended their nonsense pretty quickly. After a couple of weeks went by, the kids were still shell shocked, wondering why this guy did everything differently. One day he said, "Crab, stick around after class is over." I did. While the next class was filling into the room, he said, with that machine gun delivery of his, "Look, Crab, I'm disappointed in you. I've read your essay, and I've read your file at the guidance office. You write like a poet, and your IQ is higher than mine, which is 150. Not that I believe much in IQs. I want you to get off your butt and do some contributing in this class. You should be one of the leaders, and you just sit there reading everything, but what you're supposed to, and I want to change, starting tomorrow. Understand?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good. Now get to class, or you'll be late." And then he's out. Peters was like that. He talked like a tough guy, but he read poems like you were sure he was going to cry, and he always managed to slip a compliment into his talk to you. You didn't notice it until later, then it made you feel good. If a kid made a mistake in class, Peters always managed to make the kid feel good about the goof. He'd say something like, "If you knew all the answers, you wouldn't need me or this school, would you?" I'll bet they hated him in the staff room. He always needed a haircut. He wore the goofiest looking baggy clothes you've ever seen, draped over his 5 foot 2 inch frame. His tie was dirty and wrinkled, and he wore a cardigan rather than a sports coat or suit jacket. He had 3 or 4 pairs of fancy pointy toed cowboy boots. He was always dropping books on his rapid, commotion filled transit down the halls. I swear, he actually slid around corners. I'll bet they hated him in the staff room because every time he went in there, stepping over all the old bones and dead wood, he'd remind them, just by being there, that they were all dead and what they were doing was a hoax, draining all their creativity out of us. Peters was like one of those machines we played with in physics where you'd wind a handle and wheels would turn and then a spark would jump between two metal balls. He was always charged up and his energy jumped into his students. My father thought Peters was a dangerous man who would undermine the school, and in a way, he was right, but for the wrong reasons. My father's criticism was based on the clothing. Peters did threaten the system. He made us think, but nobody wants a thinker. Thinkers are irritating and troublesome, and they don't fit in. Our school wanted everything to be smooth, and I had to be going along. I had been going along with them all for years. Peters made me break the truce. I began to ask myself again and again about my future, and eventually I decided to cut out of the herd. The thing with teaching people to think is that you never know where they'll end up. And that's the end.